Hey everybody, and welcome to this series, Second Thoughts, where we look at some of the big ideas about life, maybe some of the small ideas about life, usually the things where this is probably not our first thought about an idea. Well, at least I think that's what this series is going to be. Literally just made it up right now. We've never made any videos for it before, so this is the first one, and we're going to kind of see how it goes. This first one, we are going to talk about God. What is God? Let's look at the concept of God. What is it actually? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to us? What has it meant? The concept, the idea, God as a name? At the end, I might even tell you what my go-to term is for this thing that we have kind of called God. So, 1. God, not a man. That idea needs to go away. God is not actually a person at all, and God is a concept. God is this idea. God is this thing. We actually can only ever name aspects of the whole thing, the thing we don't actually have a name for, right? Once we name it, it is definitely more than that one thing that we are naming. And there's a lot of reasons for this. One is we can only perceive reality from the perception of reality that we have. That might sound really obvious, but if you think of like when we look at or draw a 2D image, if that 2D image were to come to life, it would only see in one dimension. Now we are in at least a 3-dimensional world, if not more than that. And so from our perception, we can see the 2 dimensions. So we, a 3-dimensional being, can see 2-dimensional objects. A 2-dimensional being, if there was such a thing, could only see 1-dimensional objects. And so whatever created all this, wherever all this came from, would have had to have been from a perspective that was at least a dimension greater than the dimension we're in. It, the thing, whatever, is so much more than, it would have to be more than this reality. So God is not a person. Now, it's easier to understand God as a person, and so that's probably how it came around, that there is some judgmental being like in a throne off in the clouds somewhere, casting down judgments, etc., etc. And yet that just seems silly. Maybe a demigod, but like that's not the thing that created the whole thing that we are in, right? That being in the throne in the clouds, if there was one, didn't create all this. Something else would have had to create the throne and the clouds that dude's sitting in, and so that ain't it. What is it? As much as we can explain, it's whatever created that. So if you can name something, it's whatever a step removed from that is. And so if you look at it in terms of dimensions or realities or realms or just like the Big Bang in science, what created the Big Bang? No idea. That's it. If we can name that, well then it's whatever created that. It's whatever was behind that. Consciousness is kind of the thing that comes to mind. Like, oh, we can refer to it as consciousness. Like outside of, well, lack of a better word, outside of, beyond time and space, there is consciousness, right? The thought, the mind that thinks the thought to create reality. Let's go with that for now. Okay, God, capital G-O-D, is actually just a name. Like Bob or Kristen. So when we put our belief in that dude in the clouds, that name, that word in our culture has taken on the qualities of just being a name. Like, oh, Bob in the clouds. Like we worship Bob in the clouds, and Bob casts down judgments. So when we say God in our culture, it actually doesn't mean what some, or probably most of it actually think it means. We can't accurately call that God, capital G-O-D, anymore because that word's kind of been hijacked. When I say God with a capital G, it brings me to a weird place. It's like, oh, and I've been at this for a decade plus, right? God, it just sounds weird because when you say God, like out in the general public, you say, hey, do you believe in God? I don't know what you mean, and you don't know what I mean, and we mean such different things, and for the most part, the default understanding is like, hey, do you believe in Kristen in the clouds? That just doesn't make any sense. So I think we need to do away with capital G-O-D, God, because it's a name, right? In God we trust. Like, in Bob we trust. That's just a little weird. So we kind of have to expand our awareness, our thinking of this, and I think a lot of us have. I think most people kind of get all that. What it really comes down to is we understand that on a surface level. Maybe we understand that on a deeper than a surface level, and yet so much of our culture is so deeply rooted in this idea that God, the man, is sitting in a cloud somewhere, and we're supposed to believe in that. And so much of the language we use, so much of our society is built around that idea. It's built around that idea of an all-powerful, human-like being casting judgment. It's around, things like sin and good and evil and right and wrong, and it's just all over. It is a constant work of ours to remind ourselves what we mean. And so maybe that means coming up with a new word for yourself, a new way of describing what it is that reminds you that it's more than this human-like being, this humanoid that we have kind of all created. Between Reverend Ryan and myself, well, actually I stole this from them, but when we refer to God, we use the name Earl. Okay, not really. Ryan does, and it's funny. My go-to is the all that there is. Because what else could there be, right? Like, there's more out in the world than I could possibly know or name. It kind of gets me out of that duality, good and evil, being in the clouds kind of thing, and recognizes that there is a consciousness greater than I could possibly imagine. The all that there is. All encapsulating. It knows more than it recognizes more than I could possibly know. Thanks for watching. Remember to leave a like, subscribe, drop a comment. We'd love to hear from you. What is your go-to word for this thing that might otherwise be called God?